He spent millions on 27 doctors to heal his paralyzed son, and they all failed. Then a housekeeper's daughter got him to smile with a simple game. But what she found in a locked room wasn't a cure. It was the devastating secret of what truly crippled him. Welcome to Blissful Whispers, where every story holds a secret. Before we dive in, drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to join our community. Now let's uncover the truth. Some houses aren't homes. They're monuments. Monuments to wealth, to power, and sometimes to a deep and profound sadness. The Hayes estate was such a place. From the air, it was an architectural marvel, a sprawling composition of glass and white stone nestled in the manicured hills, looking less like a residence and more like the futuristic headquarters of a global corporation. But on the ground, inside its vast, echoing halls, the truth was much quieter. The air was cold, sterile, and still. The only sounds were the ones that didn't belong: the distant hum of a state-of-the-art climate control system, the faint whisper of a servant's rubber-soled shoes on polished marble. Silence was the true owner of the Hayes estate, and it was a possessive, suffocating landlord. Warren Hayes stood behind a pane of one-way glass, a silent observer in his own domain. At 42, he possessed the sharp, predatory stillness of a man who moved markets and dismantled competitors before breakfast. His suit was bespoke, his watch worth more than a suburban home, but these were merely the uniform. The man inside was fraying at the seams. It was all in his eyes, the perpetually exhausted, haunted gaze of a man who hadn't truly slept in 3 years. He was staring into what his architects had called the developmental suite, a room that had cost more to build than the average hospital wing. It was a masterpiece of therapeutic design, yet it felt like the most desolate place on earth. And in the center of it all was the prince of this silent kingdom, his son Nolan. 3 years old, Nolan was a portrait of heartbreaking perfection. He had his father's thick, dark hair and the delicate features of a porcelain doll. But his throne was a cage, albeit the most advanced one ever engineered. The Apex 7 Mobility Suite, as its designers called it, was less a wheelchair and more a personal extension of a life that couldn't begin on its own. It could climb stairs on articulated treads, self-balance on 2 wheels like a Segway, and its armrests were lined with biometric sensors that monitored Nolan's heart rate, oxygen levels, and neurological responses. It was a marvel of technology designed to give him freedom. Yet, for all its genius, it couldn't teach the boy inside it how to feel. Nolan's face was a placid, empty mask. His legs, useless since birth, were secured in padded braces, but the real paralysis seemed to be in his spirit. His eyes, a deep, intelligent blue, were fixed on the far wall, where a floor-to-ceiling screen displayed a dazzling sensory animation. It was a swirling nebula of soft, pulsing colors, a digital galaxy born from algorithms designed by the world's leading child development experts to inspire wonder and curiosity. The display cost $250,000. It did not receive so much as a blink of interest from the boy. Between Nolan and the screen stood Dr. Anya Sharma, the 28th specialist Warren had hired. Her resume was a constellation of Ivy League degrees and groundbreaking publications on pediatric trauma. In her hands she held a Lumicube, a therapeutic toy that glowed with gentle light and emitted soft, harmonic tones when touched. She moved it slowly into Nolan's line of sight, her voice a soothing, practiced murmur. "Look, Nolan. See the pretty light? Can you touch the light?" Nolan's gaze didn't flicker. It passed right through the cube, through Dr. Sharma, through the very concept of the room, and settled on a point in space somewhere beyond the physical world. Dr. Sharma sighed, the sound barely audible, and placed the cube down. She tried another tool, a set of textured blocks, each with a unique surface of silk, sand, or soft bristles. She gently took Nolan's small, limp hand and guided it over the surfaces. There was no response. No curiosity. No resistance. Nothing. His hand might as well have been an object separate from his body. His world was one of pure, passive observation. He was a spectator to his own life. From behind the glass, Warren felt a familiar, bitter acid rise in his throat. He could liquidate a rival company with a single phone call. He could bend politicians to his will with a well-placed donation. He had built a tech empire from a garage startup, a testament to his force of will and relentless ambition. He had conquered the world of things, of assets and acquisitions. But he couldn't buy a single spark of interest in his son's eyes. He couldn't purchase a giggle. He couldn't trade a fraction of his fortune for one genuine tantrum, for one simple, childish no. He had provided his son with everything a human could possibly need, except for the one thing he desperately wanted: a reason to want anything at all. He pressed his hand against the cool, unyielding glass of the observation window. The barrier was symbolic. On the other side was his son, beautiful, silent, and unreachable, trapped in a fortress of technology and expert care. Warren Hayes, the titan of industry, was just a man, a father, staring at the most expensive, most heartbreaking problem in the world. A problem that didn't need another brilliant mind or another $1 billion. It needed a miracle. And miracles, he was beginning to learn, didn't arrive on a balance sheet. They didn't respond to a hostile takeover. They simply happened. Or they didn't. And for 3 years they had not. 20 miles away, in a world that might as well have been on another planet, the silence didn't stand a chance. The apartment wasn't a monument to anything except survival and a deep, bottomless well of love. It was a third-floor walk-up where the morning light, streaked with the dust of a city that never slept, illuminated a scene of vibrant, joyful chaos. The air, thick with the smell of sizzling bacon and the sweet scent of cheap maple syrup, vibrated with noise. A television in the corner blared a cartoon about a talking squirrel on a rocket ship, competing with the rhythmic clank-thump-clatter of a construction project in the living room. At the center of this symphony was its 4-year-old conductor, Willa. She was a whirlwind of untamable curly brown hair, wearing one pink sock and one blue, her t-shirt on backwards. Her current masterpiece was a tower of pots and pans, a precarious, leaning structure that threatened to collapse with every new addition. Her tongue was stuck out in concentration, a look of intense architectural focus on her face. Her wealth wasn't in a trust fund, it was in the pocket of her overalls, which contained a perfectly smooth gray rock she'd found in the park, a half-eaten fruit snack, and a plastic dinosaur missing its tail. On the floor beside her sat Barnaby, a teddy bear whose fur had been loved away in patches and whose left eye was a button sewn on by an unsteady hand. Navigating this beautiful disaster was her mother, Claire. In her late 20s, she was a master of multitasking, a skill born of necessity. With her phone wedged between her ear and shoulder, she simultaneously flipped bacon with a spatula, poured a splash of milk into Willa's cereal, and used her foot to nudge the front door shut. She was already dressed in her simple work uniform, black pants and a plain gray polo shirt, her own hair pulled back in a practical, no-nonsense ponytail. "No, Mrs. Gable, it's no problem at all, just rest up," Claire said into the phone, her voice warm with genuine concern. "Of course. Lots of fluids. I'll call you tomorrow to check in." She hung up, and for a single fleeting moment, a look of pure, undiluted panic washed over her face. Mrs. Gable, her reliable, 60-something babysitter, had the flu. A real knock-her-flat-on-her-back flu. Claire's mind raced through her short list of emergency contacts. All of them working, all of them with their own kids and their own chaotic mornings. Today was her 3rd day at the Hayes estate. 3rd days were not for calling in sick. They were for being invisible, efficient, and impressing the client who was paying her more in a week than her last job paid in a month. This job was their lifeline, the difference between making rent with ease and scraping by on instant noodles for the last week of the month. "Mama, Barnaby says the tower needs the big pot now," Willa announced, oblivious to the crisis unfolding. "It's the crown." Claire took a deep breath, pushing the panic down. She knelt, the frantic energy in her chest softening as she looked into her daughter's bright, curious eyes. There was only one option, and it was a terrible one. But it was the only one she had. "Okay, sweet pea, change of plans," Claire said, her voice steady despite the frantic drumming of her heart. "Mrs. Gable is sick, so you're going to come with me to work today. You're going to be Mama's special helper." Willa's eyes lit up. "To the big quiet house?" "Yes, to the big quiet house." Claire took Willa's small hands in hers, her expression turning serious. "But I need you to listen to me very, very carefully. This is the most important listening you've ever done." "Okay." Willa nodded, her face a mask of solemnity. "The Hayes house isn't like our house. It's not a place for noise. It's a very, very quiet house for a little boy who needs quiet." Claire chose her words carefully. "So today we have 3 rules. Rule number 1, inside voices all the time. Not even loud whispers. Mouse voices. Can you show me your mouse voice? Willa squeaked, a tiny, adorable sound. Perfect. Rule number 2, no running. We use walking feet only. Slow, careful walking feet. Like we're trying not to wake up a sleeping giant. Another serious nod. And rule number 3, Claire said, lowering her voice even further. This is the biggest, most important rule of all. We don't touch anything. Nothing. Not the sparkly things, not the shiny things, not the chairs, not the tables. Everything in that house is very expensive, and we are only there to look with our eyes. Got it? Look with our eyes, keep our hands to ourselves. Even the toys? Willa asked, her brow furrowed. Especially the toys, Claire confirmed, her heart aching a little. Promise. I promise, Mama. Half an hour later, they were on a city bus, the familiar, vibrant chaos of their neighborhood giving way to something else entirely. The bus rumbled past rows of brick apartment buildings, past bodegas with colorful awnings and playgrounds echoing with shouts. Then the scenery began to change. The buildings grew farther apart. The patches of grass became lawns. The lawns became sprawling emerald green estates, hidden behind towering hedges and ornate iron gates. Willa's face was pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Wow, she whispered in her new mouse voice. The houses have walls. Claire squeezed her daughter's hand, her own anxiety a tight knot in her stomach. She looked down at Willa, who was clutching Barnaby the bear to her chest like a shield. She was taking a small, beautiful piece of her loud, chaotic, loving world and smuggling it into the heart of a silent, sterile kingdom. And she prayed to every god she could think of that it wouldn't be the thing that got them thrown out. The terrace was a lie. It was designed to look like a space for freedom, a sprawling expanse of pristine white limestone that overlooked a valley of ancient, undisturbed oak trees. But it was just another room of the house, one with a ceiling made of sky. The sun was warm, the air was clean, but the oppressive quiet of the estate clung to the very stones. Claire had set Willa up in a shaded corner with a brand new coloring book and a 64-pack of crayons, hoping the novelty would buy her an hour of compliance. For the first 10 minutes it worked. Willa dutifully colored a cartoon puppy, staying meticulously within the lines. But the silence was an unnatural environment for a child who thrived on noise. The red crayon felt sluggish in her hand. The stillness of the puppy on the page seemed to mock her. Her attention drifted. At the far end of the terrace, bathed in a perfect square of sunlight, sat Nolan. He was a portrait of inertia, his advanced wheelchair as motionless as a boulder. A gentle, programmed breeze from hidden vents ruffled his dark hair, the only movement in his world. Willa's promise to her mother warred with the magnetic pull of her curiosity. Curiosity as it always did, one. She put down her crayon, slipped off her chair, and began the long, quiet walk across the limestone expanse. Each footstep seemed to echo in the profound stillness. Claire, polishing a floor-to-ceiling glass door nearby, watched her daughter's slow pilgrimage with a heart full of dread, her hand freezing mid-swipe. "Don't touch," she prayed silently. "Please, Willa, just look with your eyes." Willa stopped a few feet from Nolan, tilting her head. He was like a statue in a museum, something beautiful but untouchable. "Hi," she said, her voice a little louder than the mouse squeak she'd promised. "My name's Willa. What's yours?" Nolan's gaze remained fixed on the distant trees. He didn't blink. He didn't turn. It was as if she were a ghost. Undeterred, Willa stepped closer, holding up her well-loved companion. "This is Barnaby. He's my best friend. He likes stories about pirates. Do you like pirates?" There was no reaction. His stillness was a force, a gravity well that pulled all the life from the air around him. Any other child might have given up, intimidated by the sheer wall of his indifference. But Willa wasn't just any child. She didn't see a medical case or a tragedy. She saw a challenge. Her eyes scanned the area, and that's when she saw it. Tucked away in a corner, partially hidden by a row of severe geometric boxwoods, was another wheelchair. This one was a relic compared to Nolan's futuristic pod. It was a simple manual chair with large, spoked wheels and worn-out armrests, likely kept for emergencies or for elderly visitors who were no longer expected. A spark ignited in Willa's eyes. It was an idea so pure, so simple, and so utterly brilliant that no therapist with a doctorate had ever conceived of it. She scurried over to the old chair. It was heavy, but she managed to pull it out into the sun. She clambered onto the seat, her small legs dangling, unable to reach the footrests. Grasping the push rims, she heaved, and the chair wobbled forward an inch. She pushed again, her face scrunched in effort. Awkwardly, jerkily, she propelled herself across the terrace until she was beside Nolan. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finally registering her presence. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a girl in a chair. She was in his world. "I bet I can beat you," Willa declared, her voice ringing with the unshakable confidence of a 4-year-old. She pointed a determined finger toward a grand, 3-tiered marble fountain at the opposite end of the terrace. "To the water. Ready, set, go." With a grunt, she pushed off, the old chair lurching forward. From his office window overlooking the terrace, Warren Hayes watched, his hand tightening on a pen. He was about to press the intercom to call security, to stop this strange, unsettling intrusion. But he paused. Something was happening. For the first time, an emotion flickered across Nolan's placid face. It was a faint spark of intrigue. His fingers, which had rested limply in his lap for hours, twitched. His right thumb moved, almost imperceptibly, over the small, sensitive joystick that controlled his chair. Willa was making slow, wobbly progress, her small arms straining. Nolan watched her for another second, and then, with a near-silent hum of electric motors, his chair surged forward. It didn't lurch, it glided, a whisper of motion on the smooth stone. He passed Willa in a silent, elegant rush. As he did, a strange, sharp, breathy sound escaped his lips. It was a hiccup of pure, unadulterated glee, a sound that had never been heard in that house. He zipped ahead, the wind he created a new and thrilling sensation. He looked back at Willa, who was laughing and pushing as hard as she could, falling further and further behind. And then it happened. The miracle. A smile broke across Nolan's face. It wasn't a small thing. It wasn't a twitch or a flicker. It was a sunrise. It was a brilliant, uninhibited ear-to-ear grin that cracked the porcelain mask of his face and let out a light that Warren had never seen before. It was pure, uncalculated joy. Through the thick glass of his office, Warren's breath hitched. He dropped his pen. His entire empire, his stocks, his real estate, all of it faded into nothingness. The only thing that mattered in the universe was that smile. That smile is everything. A flicker of light in 3 years of darkness. If you believe every child deserves a reason to smile this brightly, hit the like button. Only someone who thrives on misery would scroll past. High on a feeling he had never known, the thrill of a race, the joy of victory, Nolan pushed the joystick hard, attempting a triumphant high-speed turn around a decorative planter. But his coordination was clumsy from disuse, his excitement overriding his fine motor skills. The Apex 7, for all its advanced stabilizers, responded too quickly. The chair whipped around, its momentum carrying it directly toward a massive ornate Italian terracotta pot that held a flourishing geranium plant. There was a sound like a gunshot made of clay. The pot didn't just break, it exploded. An eruption of black soil, shattered terracotta, and vibrant red petals sprayed across the pristine white limestone. The crash echoed across the silent estate like a thunderclap. From inside, Claire came running, a dish rag clutched in her hand, her face ghostly white. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror. Fired. She was going to be fired. Blacklisted. They'd be out on the street. All her rules, all her warnings had ended in this, $1,000 pot, at least, lying in 1,000 pieces. She opened her mouth to scold Willa, to apologize, to beg. But the glass door to the office slid open with a violent hiss. Warren Hayes burst onto the terrace, his face a storm of emotion. Claire flinched, bracing for the inevitable explosion of rage. But Warren didn't even glance at the wreckage. He didn't see the shattered pot, the dirt, or the 2 shocked children. His gaze was locked on his son. Nolan sat in his chair amidst the debris, his face streaked with a bit of dirt, his chest still heaving from his silent laughter. The smile was still there, a radiant, messy, beautiful thing. Warren stopped, his expensive leather shoes just inches from a shard of terracotta. He wasn't angry. He was crying. Tears carved clean tracks through the exhaustion on his face, his expression one of absolute, soul-shaking relief. He was staring at his son as if he were seeing him for the very first time. The silence in the Hayes estate was officially dead. It had been murdered, joyfully and without remorse, by the sound of a little girl's laughter and the near-silent hum of 2 wheelchairs in a perpetual state of motion. The grand terrace, once a sterile monument to loneliness, had been transformed into a playground. A trail of chalk drawings now decorated the white limestone, lopsided suns, wobbly racetracks, and what appeared to be a purple dinosaur. The ghost of the shattered Italian pot had been replaced by 2 durable plastic planters filled with resilient sunflowers. For 6 weeks this was the new reality. Willa became a daily fixture, arriving with Claire each morning and leaving a wake of happy chaos in her path. Warren, in an act that baffled his accounting department, had amended Claire's contract. Her official title was now Household Manager and Child Enrichment Coordinator, and her salary was tripled. Her primary duty was no longer cleaning, but ensuring Willa was present, happy, and fully equipped for a day of play. The mansion, which had been a museum, was slowly, cautiously, learning how to be a home. Nolan was a different child. The blank, vacant mask was gone, replaced by a constant, alert curiosity. He still didn't speak, but his silence was no longer empty. It was filled with communication. A slight tilt of his head was a question. A widening of his eyes was a moment of wonder. And his laughter, though it made no sound, was a physical thing. A joyful shaking of his shoulders, a brilliant, radiant smile that could light up the entire estate. He and Willa had their own language, one of shared glances, synchronized wheelchair spins, and the universal understanding of a good game. They played hide-and-seek among the giant sculpted hedges. They had finger-painting sessions that ended with both of them looking like miniature Jackson Pollock canvases. They held races, always ending with Nolan's triumphant, silent laugh. Warren watched this transformation with a heart full of a feeling he hadn't known he was capable of, pure, unadulterated gratitude. He worked from his home office more, the door to the terrace always open. The sound of their play became the new soundtrack to his life, a constant, beautiful reminder of the miracle he was witnessing. But the world Warren inhabited, the world of boardrooms, of ruthless acquisitions and quantifiable results, does not believe in miracles. It believes in credentials. The pressure came subtly at first, then with increasing force. It came from his older brother, a man who saw the world in terms of legacy and public perception, during a tense phone call. A housekeeper's kid, Warren? It's a cute story, but what are you actually doing for the boy? You need a real strategy. People are talking. It came from the board of directors who saw the millions allocated to Nolan's therapeutic suite, producing no official reports, no data, no progress they could chart. They saw a variable, not a solution. Warren was a man of science and systems. He had built his empire on data, on predictable outcomes. The joy he saw in his son was real, but it felt unscientific, fragile. What if it was just a phase? What if he was squandering precious developmental time on simple play when there was a real answer out there? The doubt, planted by the world he knew, began to take root. And so, he did what he had always done when faced with a problem he couldn't solve. He hired the most expensive, most acclaimed expert on the planet. Dr. Alistair Finch did not arrive like a man who worked with children. He arrived in a black town car with tinted windows, stepping out in a severe, tailored gray suit that seemed to absorb the California sunlight and give nothing back. He was tall, thin, and moved with a rigid precision that suggested his own spine was made of stainless steel. He carried a slim, carbon fiber tablet and wore an expression of clinical detachment. He was here to calibrate a machine, not meet a child. Warren led him to the office overlooking the terrace. Below, Nolan and Willa were in the middle of a new game. Willa had placed Barnaby the bear on top of a low garden wall and was narrating a dramatic rescue mission. Nolan was her getaway driver, maneuvering his chair with newfound confidence. Finch watched the scene for a full 2 minutes, his face betraying no emotion. He didn't see two children playing. He saw a series of data points. Unstructured, he said finally, his voice as crisp and cold as his suit. Highly unpredictable stimulus. The subject's motor functions appear reactive, not proactive. He is merely responding to the external chaos. Warren felt a defensive bristle. He's happy, doctor. He's never been happy before. Finch turned his gaze from the window to Warren, and for the first time, a flicker of something registered on his face. It was a faint, condescending pity. Mr. Hayes, happiness is a sentimental metric. It's an emotional spike, not a developmental foundation. What your son requires is not sentiment. He requires a regimen. A rigorous, data-driven protocol designed to build new neural pathways. My work is in re-engineering the system, not simply applauding its sporadic, emotional misfires. He tapped his tablet, and a complex 3D model of a child's brain appeared. This girl, Finch continued, gesturing dismissively towards the terrace without looking, is a variable. An unhygienic one, I might add. She represents an uncontrolled, sentimental attachment that fosters dependency. We need to create a sterile baseline to measure true, replicable progress. Her presence, I'm afraid, is nothing more than unstructured, sentimental nonsense. The words hung in the air, clinical and cruel. He had taken the most beautiful thing in Warren's life, his son's joy, and dismissed it as a glitch in the system. He wanted to throw the man out of his house. But Finch was already continuing, his voice smooth and persuasive, appealing to the part of Warren that understood logic and systems above all else. He spoke of quantifiable results, of neurosensory conditioning, of alpha wave regulation. He promised charts. He promised data. He promised a solution that could be measured, presented to a board, and understood by a world that didn't trade in the currency of smiles. Dr. Finch sees a child's joy and calls it sentimental nonsense. He wants to replace laughter with charts and data. If you think human connection is more powerful than cold arrogance, hit subscribe. People like Dr. Finch are counting on you not to. Warren looked from the cold, confident doctor to the scene on the terrace below. Willa had just managed to retrieve Barnaby and had tossed him into Nolan's lap. Nolan caught the bear, hugged it tightly to his chest, and looked up at Willa with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. It was a look of friendship. A look of trust. Finch saw none of it. Her influence is counterproductive to the long-term goal, Mr. Hayes. To truly help your son, you must first remove the distractions. Warren stood there, caught in a war between his head and his heart. His head, the ruthless CEO, saw the logic in Finch's argument. There was a clear, measurable path forward. But his heart, the father who had waited 3 years to see his son smile, saw the cold, empty future Finch was offering. He was being asked to trade his son's newfound soul for a progress report. And the most terrifying part was, a part of him was actually considering it. The silence returned to the Hayes estate like a cold, insidious fog, creeping back into every corner, settling over every surface. It extinguished the last lingering echoes of laughter, smudging out the chalk drawings on the terrace with its oppressive weight. Warren Hayes, swayed by Dr. Alastair Finch's impeccable credentials and the intoxicating promise of quantifiable results, had made his choice. It was a decision driven by logic, by the relentless pursuit of a real solution, by the ingrained belief that the world's most complex problems yielded only to the world's most sophisticated minds. Willa's visits were abruptly curtailed. Claire received a polite, if chilling, phone call from Warren's assistant. Nolan's intensive new therapy schedule required a focused, distraction-free environment. The compensation, however, would continue as before, a guilt-ridden attempt to buy absolution. Claire, heartbroken for Willa, for Nolan, for the spark she'd seen ignite, could only nod mutely. Willa cried that night, clutching Barnaby and demanding to know why her friend wouldn't play anymore. Claire had no good answer. Dr. Finch's regimen was implemented with the precision of a military operation. The developmental suite, once a sterile haven, became a clinical laboratory. Nolan was wheeled in each morning not to play, but to participate in a grueling, repetitive schedule of neurological recalibration. The vibrant sensory screen was replaced by a grid of flashing lights, designed to stimulate optic nerve responses without emotional engagement. Therapeutic toys were traded for weighted objects, systematically used to develop fine motor skills in Nolan's inert hands. Finch himself was a constant, calm presence, his voice a monotone drone as he issued instructions to Nolan, his eyes fixed on the data stream flowing to his tablet. There were no more races, no more games of rescue the teddy bear. There was no more laughter, not even Nolan's silent, shaking kind. Instead, there was the rhythmic beep-boop of biometric monitors, the gentle whir of robotic assists, and Finch's quiet, insistent directives. Nolan was put through hours of sterile, repetitive exercises designed to build neural pathways that, Finch assured Warren, were essential for true, measurable progress. The doctor spoke of enhanced proprioception, optimized cortical engagement, and alpha wave regulation. He proudly showed Warren charts, meticulously generated from the biometric data, indicating minute, increased motor response times, and stabilized brainwave patterns. "See, Mr. Hayes," Finch would explain, his pointer gliding across a projected graph. "The blue line indicates a 0.7% improvement in targeted flexion after the visual cue. A remarkable, statistically significant gain." Warren would nod, feigning understanding. On paper, Finch was a genius. The numbers didn't lie. They were objective. They were measurable. They were everything the emotional chaos of Willa's play was not. But the data, Warren was slowly, sickeningly realizing, told only half the story. The numbers were improving, but the boy behind the numbers was fading. Warren started watching Nolan again, not from an office window, but from inside the therapy room, a silent, increasingly desperate ghost in his own son's nightmare. The light in Nolan's eyes, once so brilliant, was now dim. The subtle shifts in his posture that had indicated engagement were gone, replaced by the same listless indifference he had exhibited before Willa. He wasn't just quiet, he was unresponsive. He was retreating. He refused to engage with Finch's program, sometimes shutting down completely. During a session where Finch was attempting to make Nolan grasp a weighted ball, Nolan simply slumped forward in his chair, his head resting against his chest, refusing to even acknowledge the world around him. Finch, unperturbed, merely noted, subject exhibiting avoidance behavior. Increased resistance observed. Continue protocol. He saw it as a hurdle to overcome, another data point. Warren saw it as a desperate plea. The smiles had completely vanished. Nolan's face was once again the placid, empty mask. The silence had returned to the mansion, heavier and more painful than ever before because Warren knew what had been lost. He was tormented, a man caught between the experts' infallible data and the undeniable, soul-crushing proof of his son's misery. He had sought scientific certainty and found only emotional devastation. He had chased the promise of a cure and in doing so, had stolen his son's nascent joy. Finch was literally sucking the joy out of a child's life for the sake of his ego and his charts. It's a form of bullying disguised as therapy. If you agree that forcing a child into a box is wrong, comment "Play is power" below. One evening, Warren sat alone in Nolan's room after Finch had departed, leaving behind only the antiseptic smell of the room and the hum of the idle equipment. Nolan was asleep in his specialized bed, his face serene but distant even in slumber. Warren reached out and gently traced the line of his son's jaw. He remembered the feel of Nolan's silent laughter, the light in his eyes. He remembered the broken flower pot, the scatter of dirt, the pure, uninhibited joy. He had traded that for charts and data. He had traded his son's soul for a percentage point. He had made a terrible mistake, and he had no idea how to fix it. With Willa's vibrant energy banished from the estate, Claire's days became as quiet and hollow as the mansion's hallways. Her new duties were a collection of make-work tasks, designed to justify her generous salary. One morning, Warren's assistant handed her a single, ornate brass key. "Mr. Hayes has requested that the West Wing master suite be aired out and prepared for a deep cleaning," the assistant said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It has been sealed for some time." Claire knew the rumors. This was Eleanor's wing, Nolan's mother. The rooms had been locked the day she left, 3 years ago, and never opened since. The key felt cold and heavy in her hand like the key to a tomb. The moment she turned the lock and pushed the heavy door open, a wave of stale, still air washed over her. The room was a mausoleum of a dead marriage. Every piece of furniture, a grand four-poster bed, elegant armchairs, a delicate vanity, was draped in a formless white dust sheet, making the space look like a landscape of silent, sleeping ghosts. The only thing not covered was a thick layer of dust that coated every surface, preserving the room in a state of suspended grief. Her task was simple: pull back the sheets, open the windows. But a profound sadness permeated the space, and she found herself moving slowly, reverently. She began with a small bedside table on the far side of the bed, the side that must have been Eleanor's. As she wiped its dusty surface, her cleaning cloth snagged on a small, almost invisible seam in the wood. Curious, she pressed on it. A section of the tabletop popped up, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with use. It felt wrong, a violation of a stranger's deepest secrets, but an irresistible force made her open it. The first few entries were filled with the breathless joy of a new mother. But the tone quickly darkened, the elegant script becoming jagged, frantic. Claire's blood ran cold as she read. She learned the truth in a rush of tear-stained ink. Nolan's condition wasn't from birth. It was from a fall. When he was 6 months old, during a vicious, screaming argument that echoed through the mansion's cold halls, his high chair had been knocked over. The official story, the one told to doctors and family, was that it was a tragic accident. A catastrophic spinal injury. But Eleanor's final entry, written in a shaky, nearly illegible hand, revealed a mother's horrifying, intuitive belief. "It's not just his body," she wrote. "It's his soul. The doctors don't see it. It wasn't the fall that broke him. It was us. The rage. He built a prison inside himself to escape it, a fortress of silence where nothing could hurt him again. And I, his mother, am the ghost that haunts its halls. I have to leave. It is the only way he might ever be free." Claire sank to the floor, the journal clutched in her hands. It all made a terrible, perfect sense. Nolan wasn't just crippled by a fall. He was a prisoner of a memory, his body locked down by an infant mind's desperate act of self-preservation. And Dr. Finch's cold, rigid, demanding therapy, it wasn't just ineffective. It was a perfect echo of the original trauma, actively reinforcing the walls of his prison. A hidden secret has kept this boy trapped in more ways than one. The truth can be painful, but it's the first step to healing. Hit the like button if you believe that facing the truth is always worth it, no matter how hard it is. For an hour, Claire sat on the dusty floor of the sealed room, the small leather journal feeling like a block of ice in her hands. Every instinct screamed at her to put it back, to lock the door, and to forget everything she had read. She was a housekeeper. This was not her secret to know, not her battle to fight. Showing this to Warren Hayes was an act of professional suicide, a catastrophic overstep that would undoubtedly get her fired and possibly sued. But then she pictured Nolan's face, the brief, brilliant light she'd seen when he played with Willa, and the vacant, hollow look he wore under Dr. Finch's care. She thought of the cold, clinical therapy, a perfect, unintentional reenactment of a waking nightmare. She couldn't stay silent. His soul was at stake. With shaking legs, she stood, clutching the journal to her chest. She found Warren in his office, the same room from which he had once watched his son smile. He was staring at a wall of monitors displaying Finch's latest progress charts, but his eyes were unfocused, his face a mask of profound defeat. He looked like a king who had conquered the world only to find his own castle empty. "Mr. Hayes?" Claire's voice was a tremor in the quiet room. He turned, his expression hardening slightly at the interruption. "What is it, Claire?" She took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Sir, I was cleaning the West Wing suite as you asked. I found something. I know this is not my place, but I believe you need to see it." She held out the journal. He looked from the small book to her face, his eyes narrowing with suspicion and irritation. "What is this? What were you doing going through private drawers?" "It was in a hidden compartment," she explained, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Please, sir. Just read it." He snatched the journal from her hand, his anger a brittle shield. "This is a grotesque invasion of privacy. You are so far over the line." He stopped mid-sentence as he recognized the familiar leather and the faded gold initials on the cover, "Ich Eleanor." His fury faltered, replaced by a wave of something colder, something that looked like fear. He opened it. He read. Claire watched as the carefully constructed dam of Warren Hayes' composure disintegrated in real time. His face, at first tight with anger, slackened into disbelief. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the small book. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat as he read the final, damning entry. The journal slipped from his fingers and fell silently onto the plush carpet. The memory, buried for 3 years under the concrete and steel of a business empire, erupted. He wasn't in his office anymore. He was back in that cavernous room, the air thick with the poison of their words, the sound of Eleanor's choked sobs, the sight of the overturned high chair. He remembered the sickening thud, a sound that had haunted the edges of his sleep ever since. He remembered the silence that followed the screaming, a silence that was the exact same hollow stillness he saw in his son's eyes every day. He had blamed Eleanor. She had blamed him. They had both blamed a tragic, blameless accident. But the truth, as written in his wife's desperate hand, was so much worse. It wasn't an accident. It was an infection. Their rage was a poison that had seeped into their son, and his small body had shut itself down to survive. Warren collapsed into his leather chair, a ragged sob tearing from his chest. The grief was a physical force, a tidal wave of guilt that shattered his pride, his denial, his entire identity as a man in control. He finally understood. Every specialist, every machine, every dollar he had thrown at the problem had been aimed at the wrong target. He had been trying to fix a broken body, when he should have been trying to heal a terrified soul. After a long moment, he looked up at Claire, his eyes red and raw with a pain she could scarcely comprehend. There was no anger left. Only a devastating, humbling clarity. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements slow but deliberate. He walked out of his office and down the long hall to the developmental suite. Through the observation glass, he saw the scene. Dr. Finch, his face a mask of detached patience, was attempting to attach a series of sensory nodes to Nolan's temples. Nolan was resistant, his small body rigid, his head turned away. He was trapped, terrified, and the man tasked with healing him was nothing more than a new monster in the dark. Warren keyed in the code and the door hissed open. Both Finch and Nolan looked up. "We're done here," Warren said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its usual authority, yet it carried an absolute finality. Finch stood up, his expression shifting to one of condescending confusion. "Mr. Hayes, we are at a critical juncture in the protocol. His resistance is a predictable phase. The data suggests." "The data is meaningless," Warren cut him off, his gaze fixed on his son. "You've been measuring all the wrong things." "I assure you my metrics are the industry standard," Finch began, his arrogance puffing up. "The progress is undeniable if you'd only look at the charts." "Look at the boy, damn you," Warren's voice cracked. He walked over and gently unstrapped the half-applied sensory node from Nolan's head. "You see resistance. I see terror. You see a data point. I see my son." He turned back to Finch. "Pack your things. You're fired." Finch sputtered, indignant, talking of contracts and professional reputation, but Warren wasn't listening. He was already wheeling Nolan out of the room, away from the beeping machines and the cold, clinical gaze of a man who could see a brain but not a child. Back in his office, he did the hardest thing he had ever had to do. He picked up the phone and dialed Claire's extension. She answered on the first ring. "Claire," he began, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him, humility. I was wrong. About everything. I've been trying to fix him like he's a broken machine." He took a shaky breath. "I need help. I don't know how to do this, but I think maybe Willa does." "Please," he said, the word a quiet plea. "Can you bring her back?" The sun streamed into the vast living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. But this time the light felt warm, not sterile. The grand space, usually reserved for art and silence, had been transformed. Soft, colorful playmats now covered a section of the pristine marble floor. Oversized, brightly colored pillows were scattered across a low-slung sofa. The air hummed with a different kind of energy, anticipation. Willa burst into the room, her hair a wild halo, Barnaby the teddy bear clutched tight. Her eyes, wide with importance, scanned the makeshift play area. Warren was there, not in his tailored suit, but in casual clothes, kneeling awkwardly on one of the playmats. Claire stood nearby, a nervous but hopeful smile on her face. Nolan, out of his advanced chair for the first time in months, was carefully positioned on a large, soft cushion on the floor, his back against a bolster. He looked small, vulnerable, but his eyes were fixed on Willa, a flicker of something long absent returning to them. "Okay, Willa," Warren said, his voice softer, less commanding than Claire had ever heard it. "I told Nolan we need your help. We need to play the very best game ever to make him feel super brave and super safe. Can you do that?" Willa nodded, her brow furrowed with the seriousness of her mission. She understood the unspoken truth. Nolan was sad. And Willa knew how to fix sad. "You played it away." Her eyes lit on Barnaby. "Okay," she announced, holding the teddy bear aloft. "Barnaby is trapped. He's on top of Mount Sofa Doom." She scampered over to the low sofa, placed Barnaby on a pillow, and then carefully army-crawled back, pretending to dodge invisible lasers. Only the bravest heroes can save him. Nolan watched, a subtle shift in his posture, a slight lean forward. He was engaged. Truly engaged. First, the super spy has to sneak past the sleeping guard. Willa whispered, pointing at Warren, who dutifully closed his eyes and pretended to snore. She giggled, then continued her elaborate, whispered narration. She army crawled across the mat, her hands and knees propelling her. She turned back to Nolan, her eyes sparkling. It's your turn, Nolan. You have to be the super spy now. You have to save Barnaby. This was it. The moment of truth. Warren had carefully, gently, helped Nolan out of his multi-million-dollar chair and onto the floor. It was a terrifying, unprecedented move, one no therapist had ever dared, fearing further injury, further psychological trauma. But Warren had to trust Willa. He had to trust his son. Nolan lay on his stomach, propped on his elbows, gazing at Barnaby, then at Willa's expectant face. He understood. This wasn't therapy. This was a game. He wanted the bear. He wanted to play. He wanted to win. The desire, so long dormant, was a tiny incandescent flame in his chest. He reached out his right arm, straining, his fingers splayed. It wasn't enough. The sofa was too far. His arm trembled, his face a mask of effort and frustration. You can do it, Nolan. Willa cheered, a pure, uninhibited encouragement that pierced through the carefully constructed silence of Nolan's inner world. Try. Just a little bit. Warren and Claire held their breath, their hearts pounding in unison. Nolan's eyes squeezed shut with effort. His entire body tensed. He grunted, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound of sheer physical exertion. And then it happened. It wasn't a spasm. It wasn't a reflex. It was a monumental act of will. His right leg, paralyzed for 3 years, dragged forward. Just an inch. The movement was clumsy, ungraceful, a raw act of a body rediscovering itself. But it was intentional. It was voluntary. It was a beginning. A gasp escaped Claire's lips. Warren, his own eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and surging hope, reached out to steady Nolan, not to interfere but to support. Nolan's eyes snapped open. He looked at the inch his leg had moved. A fresh surge of determination, fierce and undeniable, filled his small face. He pulled again, using his arms, his shoulders, and the incredible nascent will of a 3-year-old who desperately wanted to play. His left leg, though still unresponsive, shifted slightly from the effort of his torso. He dragged himself forward again. Another inch. Then another. The connection, severed by trauma, had been re-established through the sheer power of play, the safety of friendship, and the unwavering belief of a little girl who saw him not as a patient, but as a peer. Nolan was crawling, slowly, painstakingly, but unmistakably, across the playmat. He was moving towards the bear. He was moving towards Willa. He was moving towards life. Warren and Claire watched, breathless, tears streaming down their faces as their son, who had been imprisoned for so long, began to break free. He moved. Against all odds, against all the expert opinions, a boy just moved. This is the power of love and friendship over cold, hard logic. If you're on the side of hope, hit subscribe right now. The cynics and haters won't. Autumn had painted the valley in hues of gold and crimson, and 6 months had passed since the day Nolan Hayes had first crawled across the floor. The Hayes estate now had a soundtrack. It was a blend of a little girl's cheerful commands, a boy's tentative new words, and the soft, rhythmic thud of physical therapy balls on padded mats. The silence was not just broken, it was banished, chased away by the relentless, joyful energy of healing. Nolan's days were a fusion of cutting-edge physical rehabilitation and chaotic, unstructured play sessions with Willa. He still used his chair for mobility, but he now spent hours on the floor, the once limp muscles in his back and shoulders showing a new, hard-won definition. The most profound change, however, wasn't in his body, but in the air itself. He had started to speak. The words were simple at first, islands in a sea of silence, but they were a miracle. They were the names of the things that mattered: Willa, bear, race, more. Warren had been reborn alongside his son. The ruthless CEO had been replaced by a devoted, present father. One afternoon, he had presented Claire not with a paycheck, but with a proposal. He was establishing a new charitable organization, the Hayes Foundation for Childhood Play Therapy, with a mission to bring Willa's brand of intuitive, joyful healing to children who, like Nolan, were trapped in worlds of silence and clinical procedure. He offered Claire the position of executive director. In that moment, their dynamic shifted forever. They were no longer master and servant, but partners in a future brighter than either had dared to imagine. The journey reached its quiet apex on a crisp autumn afternoon in the garden. Nolan stood between a set of low, custom-built parallel bars, his small hands gripping the cool metal. Warren and Claire stood a few feet away, their faces a mixture of hope and heart-stopping tension. At the far end of the bars, Willa stood, holding Barnaby the bear aloft like a trophy. "Come on, Nolan," she yelled, her voice ringing with unwavering faith. "Barnaby is waiting for his victory parade. You can do it." Nolan's face was a mask of fierce concentration. He took a deep, shaky breath, his entire body trembling with the monumental effort. He was channeling every race he had ever won, every game he had ever played, every laugh he had ever shared. He lifted his right foot. It was a shaky, uncertain movement, a question asked of muscles that had never before answered. For a heart-stopping second he wavered. Then, with a grunt of pure determination, he placed it down, a full 6 inches in front of his left. He had taken a step. A single, wobbly, miraculous step. From a shattered pot to a first step. This journey was about healing more than just legs. It was about healing a family, about proving that the most powerful medicine is often just a simple human connection. Comment "Hope wins" to celebrate this new beginning and to stand against everyone who said it was impossible.